The porcelain teacup trembled just slightly in my hands, not from fear, but from the sheer absurdity of it all. The delicate floral pattern seemed to mock me as I sat perfectly still in the velvet armchair that probably cost more than my car. The room smelled of aged wood and expensive perfume, a scent so heavy it clung to the air like a second skin. Across from me, Mrs. Holloway adjusted the pearls at her throat with fingers that had never known a day of honest labor. Her husband, Mr. Holloway, sat with his legs crossed, one polished Oxford resting carelessly on the knee of the other, as if he owned not just this mansion, but the very concept of leisure. I took a slow breath in through my nose and out through my mouth, a trick I'd learned in the lab to steady my nerves before calibrating sensitive equipment. This wasn't so different, really. Except instead of electrodes and data streams, I was calibrating my silence against their assumptions. I didn't look at Julian, my boyfriend, not yet. I knew what I'd see. The slight tension in his jaw, the way his eyes kept darting between me and his mother, as if silently begging me to conform to some invisible script I hadn't been handed. When he'd invited me to weekend brunch at the estate, I'd worn my oldest sweater, the one with the tiny hole near the elbow, and my thrift store jeans, the kind with fading that looked accidental but was actually very carefully curated. I hadn't dressed this way to provoke them, though part of me wondered if that was a lie. I dressed this way because for the past 8 months, I'd been playing a role. Not a lie, exactly, more like a filter, a necessary disguise. Because in my real life, I signed contracts that moved markets. I led a team of 53 engineers across 3 continents. I'd sold my second company before I turned 30, and the trust fund they assumed I was desperately trying to marry into, I'd actually built myself. In a world where brick by a woman like me often invites either predatory interest or performative disdain, I'd learned that showing too much too soon was like lighting a match in a room full of gas. So I let them see the surface. The messy ponytail, the nervous laugh, the girl who double-checks the price before ordering coffee. I let them believe I was someone they could comfortably pity. And in that belief, they revealed themselves completely. Mrs. Holloway set her teacup down with a soft clink that somehow echoed like a gavel. "You're in graphic design," Julian mentioned, she said, her voice smooth as cream but cold as marble. "I'm actually in computational linguistics," I replied, keeping my tone light, almost shy. "We develop predictive algorithms for multilingual crisis response systems." Her eyebrows lifted just a fraction, as if I'd accidentally spoken in one of those languages instead of English. "How fascinating," she said, in the exact tone people use when they mean the opposite. Julian shifted in his seat, finally looking at me with an expression that said, "Please just go along with it for me." And in that moment I understood. This wasn't just brunch. This was an audition, and my role was to be grateful for the privilege of being considered worthy of their son. I smiled softly and let my shoulders slump just a little, as if the weight of my imagined financial precarity was too much to bear. "Oh, it's mostly freelance," I said, lowering my eyes. "I've been looking into part-time barista work, actually, to make ends meet." Mr. Holloway chuckled softly, not unkindly, but with the detached amusement of a man watching ants scurry beneath his boot. "You young people and your side hustles," he said. "You know, in my day, we just worked one job and trusted the system to reward loyalty." I wanted to tell him the system he trusted had been cannibalized decades ago, replaced by algorithms and offshore accounts and layoffs disguised as restructuring. I nodded like I believed in that simpler time, like I was just a girl hoping to stumble into stability by clinging to his son's coattails. Before I tell you what happened next, drop a comment, and let me know where you're watching from and what time it is. I want to remember this moment through your eyes, too. Because what came next wasn't just confrontation. It was excavation. They weren't just judging me. They were revealing the rot beneath their own gilded floorboards. I didn't play dumb because I was ashamed of who I was. I played dumb because I needed to see if Julian loved me, or if he just loved the version of himself he became when he was with someone he thought needed him. The truth is, I met Julian in a coffee shop. Not the kind with marble counters and single-origin pour-overs, but the kind with sticky tables and mismatched mugs. He was reading Proust, of all things, his brow furrowed in concentration like he was trying to solve a math problem. I was there because the Wi-Fi was decent, and I was debugging a server crash that had taken down our emergency translation protocol for a refugee camp in Jordan. I remember he looked up and caught me staring, not at him, but at the coffee stain on his shirt that vaguely resembled the map of Ukraine. I said something stupid like, "Is that Europe, or just bad laundry?" And instead of being offended, he laughed, a real laugh, not the practiced chuckle he used with his parents, but something raw and unguarded. In that moment, I saw past the tailored coats and the Ivy League pedigree to the boy underneath, who still believed stories could change the world. I let myself fall for that boy. Not the heir, not the polished product of generations of privilege, but the reader, the dreamer, the one who cried during documentaries about ocean conservation. I didn't tell him about my work. Not because I was hiding, but because I was testing a hypothesis. Can someone love you when their hands aren't manicured? Can they hear your ambition when you're not shouting it from a podium? For months, I watched him take pride in buying me dinner, explaining wine pairings like he was imparting ancient wisdom, letting me borrow his coat when it rained as if it was the height of romance. Never once did he ask what I did beyond the vague, freelance design answer I'd given him at the start. He never asked about my day, my stress, my triumphs. He assumed my life was small, and in that assumption he revealed the limits of his imagination. He didn't want an equal. He wanted a project, someone he could lift up, not walk beside. And I let him believe it, because the armor I wore wasn't just protection. It was a mirror, and I needed to see what kind of man he truly was. The brunch table was quiet for a beat too long after my barista comment. Then Mrs. Holloway leaned forward, her diamond bracelet catching the morning light like shattered ice. "You know, dear," she said, "I've been meaning to ask. Are you planning to stay in the city long term, or will you be moving back home once Julian starts his residency?" I blinked. "Home. I live in the city," I said gently. "My apartment is in the Arts District near the river." She waved a hand as if swatting away a fly. "That district is lovely for students, but once you're married, you'll want something more stable, more appropriate for a doctor's wife." The word wife landed like a stone in still water. I looked at Julian. He was staring into his teacup as if it held the answers to questions he didn't want to ask. I realized then that he hadn't corrected her. Not once. Not about my job. Not about my background. Not about the future she was scripting for us without my input. I was a character in their narrative, not a co-author. And that's when the shift happened. It wasn't anger that rose in my chest. It was clarity, cold and clinical, like the moment a microscope because I was quiet. They thought I was poor because I wasn't flashy. They thought I was simple because I wasn't performing. And in their arrogance, they never considered that the quietest person in the room might be the one holding all the cards. My silence wasn't submission. It was observation. And what I observed was a family clinging to the illusion of control, while their foundation crumbled beneath them. I noticed the way Mr. Holloway's cufflinks were slightly mismatched, the kind of detail only someone used to inventorying assets would catch. I saw the tension in Mrs. Holloway's neck when the maid brought out the scones, as if she was counting portions, not savoring flavors. I saw the tremor in Julian's hand when he reached for the jam jar, not from nerves, but from the strain of maintaining a persona that no longer fit, like a suit 2 sizes too small. They were drowning in legacy and mistaking me for driftwood instead of the lifeboat. They didn't know I was the anonymous investor who just bailed out their private hospital's failing oncology wing. They didn't know I'd been offered a seat on the board of directors and turned it down, because I didn't want my name linked to their crumbling empire. They didn't know that the modest apartment they pitted was just one of 5 properties I owned worldwide, all held under trusts so obscure, even their lawyers couldn't trace them. I played the part they wrote for me because I needed to see if Julian would ever look up from the script long enough to see me. The real me. Not the damsel. Not the distraction. But the woman who could walk into their world and buy it without blinking, but chose not to, because ownership isn't always the point. Sometimes the point is freedom. And I wasn't free as long as I was pretending. So I set my teacup down. The sound, sharp in the hushed room. Actually, I said, my voice calm and clear, I won't be moving the purchase of a new research facility downtown. It's going to house our AI ethics division. We're calling it the Verity Institute, after my grandmother. She believed truth should be accessible, not just to the wealthy, but to everyone who dares to ask hard questions. Mrs. Holloway's smile froze mid-adjustment. Mr. Holloway's teacup paused halfway to his lips. Julian finally looked at me, his eyes wide, not with admiration, but with something closer to betrayal, as if I'd broken a promise I never made. You never said you were an AI, he whispered, the accusation clear in his voice. I never said I wasn't, I replied. And that's the problem, isn't it? You never asked. You never wanted to know. Because the real me wouldn't fit in your neat little story about the struggling artist who needs saving. I turned to his parents. Your concern about my future is touching, really. But I've been funding my own future since I was 22. The hospital donation last month? That's mine too. I thought saving lives might earn me a seat at this table. But maybe some tables aren't worth sitting at. Julian stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the hardwood like a distress signal. Grace, wait, he said, his voice cracking. Please, this isn't what I thought you were. I know, I said. And that's exactly why this ends here. I walked out through the French doors into the garden, where the roses were blooming, just a little too perfectly trimmed, too symmetrical, too controlled, like everything else in their world. 6 months later, the Verity Institute opened its doors to its first cohort of scholars. All women from underfunded public schools, all brilliant, all underestimated, just like someone once thought I was. Julian sent a letter once, asking for a second chance. I didn't open it. I was too busy reviewing grant applications from girls who believed their worth wasn't tied to a man's approval or a bank account. I still wear that old sweater sometimes, not as a disguise, but as a reminder that the most powerful truths are often hidden in plain sight. And that sometimes, the quietest exit makes the loudest statement. The rain started just as I pulled into the driveway of the brownstone. Not the kind of rain that refreshes the air, but the kind that seems to seep into your bones, slow and insistent, like regret. I didn't mind. I turned off the engine and sat for a moment, listening to the drumming on the roof, watching the streetlights blur through the water-streaked windshield. My phone buzzed on the passenger seat. One notification. Just one. From an old group chat titled Family Weekends. A photo had been uploaded. Julian, back at the estate, standing beside a woman in a cream linen dress, both of them smiling at a garden party under white string lights. The caption read, New beginnings. I didn't feel anger. Not anymore. What I felt was something quieter, heavier relief. The kind that comes after you've carried a weight you didn't realize you were holding until it's finally gone. I tapped the screen once, then locked my phone and stepped out into the downpour. My sneakers splashed through puddles as I walked up the steps, not bothering with an umbrella. Inside, the lights were on. Warm. Golden. The kind of light that doesn't perform. It just is. On the kitchen counter sat a note from Lena, my lab partner and closest friend. Leftover pad thai in fridge. Also, Verity got the UNESCO grant. Full funding. 3 years. Cry happy tears for me. I already did. I smiled. Not the practiced, performative smile I'd worn at that brunch table. This one reached my eyes. I poured a glass of water, tap water, no crystal, no ceremony, and walked to the window. The city stretched out below, wet and humming, alive in a way that estates on manicured hills could never be. I thought about the girl I'd been 8 months ago, the one who hesitated answers to questions she hoped no one would ask, who believed love required shrinking. I didn't miss her. I honored her. She'd done what she needed to survive. But survival wasn't the goal anymore. Living was. And living meant choosing yourself. Even when the world offers you a gilded cage with silk lining and calls it love. I hadn't set out to humiliate Julian or his parents. Revenge wasn't the point. The point was sovereignty, the unshakable knowledge that your worth isn't up for negotiation. Not by a lover, not by a family, not by a society that confuses polish with value. I remembered the way Mrs. Holloway had looked at my hands that day, like they were evidence of failure. But these hands, calloused from late nights soldering circuit boards, ink-stained from scribbling breakthroughs on napkins, steady enough to present at Davos, had built something real. Not a legacy etched in marble and maintained by debt, but a living, breathing ecosystem of opportunity. The Verity Institute wasn't just a building. It was a promise. A promise that brilliance doesn't require permission. That ambition in a woman isn't a threat, it's a compass. And that sometimes, the most radical act of self-love is to stop pretending you're less than you are just to make someone else feel more. I opened my laptop. The grant documents were waiting. I skimmed the terms, then typed a single line into the notes section. Priority cohort. Daughters of service workers, single mothers, first-gen scholars. I hit save. Outside, the rain eased into a mist. Somewhere in this city, a girl was hunched over a borrowed laptop in a laundromat, coding her way out of invisibility. Somewhere, another was rehearsing a presentation in her bathroom mirror, because it's the only quiet space in her shared apartment. They didn't know it yet, but they already had a seat at my table, a table with no velvet chairs, no hidden judgments, just open doors and open minds.
With bitterness.
I thought about
but
Julian
with a kind
again.
of
Mournful clarity. He hadn't been evil. He'd just been small. And small people fear big truths. They need hierarchies to feel safe. They need someone beneath them to feel above. I'd mistaken his need for love. But love doesn't ask you to disappear. Love says, show me all of you, and I'll still choose you. He never got the chance to say that because I never gave him the real me. And maybe that was my fault. But maybe it was also my protection. Because giving your whole self to someone who only wants a fraction is like handing a masterpiece to someone who only sees the frame. They'll hang it proudly, never knowing what's inside. I closed the laptop and walked to the balcony. The city lights shimmered through the lingering moisture in the air, flickering, imperfect, resilient. Just like the people who built it. I wrapped my arms around myself, not for warmth, but for the simple comfort of my own presence. I was enough. Not because of my bank account or my titles or the institutions that now sought my name on their letterhead, but because I had chosen, over and over, to believe in the woman beneath the armor. The one who burns toast, who cries at dog commercials, who wears holy sweaters, not as a disguise, but as a declaration. I am here. Not for your approval. Not for your narrative. Just because I belong. And that was enough. More than enough. It was everything. I went back inside, reheated the pad thai, and sat at my kitchen table. The one with the scratched surface and the wobbly leg I'd never fixed because it reminded me that beauty doesn't require perfection. As I ate, I opened a new document. Title: Open Letter to the Next Generation of Quiet Builders. I typed the first line. You don't have to announce your worth to the world. Just keep building. They'll feel the ground shake soon enough. Later, I'd send it to every mentor, every student, every stranger who'd ever been told they were too much. My apartment, with rain still whispering against the windows, I just sat. Present. Whole. Free. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't have to play any part but my own. The truth had set me not just free, but home. And home wasn't a mansion on a hill. It was this breath, this moment, this unshakable peace that came from knowing exactly who you are and refusing to apologize for it. I finished my meal, washed the plate, and turned off the lights. Tomorrow, the real work would begin again. But tonight I let myself rest, not as a founder, not as an investor, not as a symbol, but as grace. Just grace. And that, more than any fortune or title, was the victory. The city slept. I didn't. I was too busy dreaming of all the girls who would walk through Verity's doors and finally see themselves reflected. Not as problems to be fixed, but as forces to be unleashed. And in that dream, I was no longer the quiet observer. I was the spark, the steady hand, the voice that said, go ahead, build. Because now I finally could. And so could they.